If a pilot flew an airplane like this in World War II, then a million missions proved his post-war plane. But would he want to buy an airplane like this when he got home from the war? We're going to tell you in Celebrating Aviation with Mike Machat. If you watch Sky King on Saturday mornings, or if you built models like these, or even if you took a ride in a Piper Cub, you were involved with private planes. Pilots of these warbirds in World War II were expected to want to buy their own private planes when they came home from the war. The potential market for pilots returning home from the war was estimated to be 200,000 airplanes. Idyllic images like dad taking mom and little Tommy up in the family Piper Super Cruiser were in the media, and more than 50 new or existing light aircraft types were available by the end of 1947. Some never left the drawing board, while others became classics, like this Air Coupe, which had interconnected controls and was supposed to be stall-proof, although that was not always the case. But this little airplane provided a wonderful opportunity for handicapped pilots to be able to fly airplanes. And there was a new machine on the scene, the Bell helicopter with the Model 47, which became to rotary wing aviation what the Piper Cub was to fixed wing aviation. Even the names of the airplanes, like the Stinson station wagon, conveyed the family aspect and the ease of general aviation. Here you see an ad for the new Stinson, very much like the automobiles with new cars every season. And the Stinson carried 4 people comfortably, economically, and the ad says it was equally useful for family or business travel. The Republic Thunderbolt Amphibian, which became the CB, is featured here on this magazine cover by Ren Wicks. The article was about post-war personal planes. The spec sheet for the CB said that it's a 4-place all-metal amphibian, 120-mile-an-hour top speed, 103-mile-an-hour cruise, and a 1,000-foot takeoff run on the water. But most importantly, it had a flyaway factory Farmingdale price of $3,995. Now that seems amazing for a new airplane, but let's put that in perspective. A new house at that time was between $10,000 and $15,000. And this is where the market changed dramatically. The veterans returning home from the war bought new homes on the GI Bill, went back to school, started families, started businesses, and in many cases for pilots, the last thing they ever wanted to see in their lives was an airplane, and the entire market went bust. But let's look at some of the machines that were available at that time. If you flew the Lockheed P-38, then your company would build a little airplane called the Big Dipper, in keeping with the Galaxy naming theme. There was a 2-seat version called the Little Dipper. And again, the idea was to have the freedom and mobility of your own airplane for business trips or fun travel. If you flew a Republic P-47, as I mentioned, the CB would be your airplane. If you flew a North American P-51 Mustang, North American had the Navion, which was even modeled after the lines of the P-51. Navion itself was a contraction of North American Aviation. And the CB and the Navion are classics today. Many are still being flown. Here we see the cockpit of the Navion. You see the automotive theme to it. And the idea was if you weren't a pilot, it was an easy thing to learn to fly. If you flew Douglas Dauntlesses, your airplane would be the Douglas Cloudster II. This was a pusher design, seen here with Mr. Douglas getting aboard, and again with an automobile-type door. This airplane never went into production, but check out those white wall tires. Douglas, of course, produced the A-20 Havoc and the A-26 Invader, and the chief designer on those airplanes was a gentleman named Ted Smith, who later left Douglas to start his own group and was instrumental in designing the Aero Commander series of high-wing twin-engine aircraft. Beechcraft had the AT-11 multi-engine trainer in World War II, and of course the C-45 transport, which evolved into the D-18 Twin Beech. But the airplane that put Beechcraft on the map was the Bonanza, a 1947 design. And this became, to this day, the world's longest continuously produced aircraft in history. The V-tail Bonanzas were produced up until the 1970s, and then the airplanes being built today are conventional tail, but it's the same type certificate. Cessna had a family of airplanes, single engine, high wing, evolved from the 140 and 180 series and 170. The 172 at bottom and the Skyhawk, Skylane, and the 310 were the Cessna family by the mid-1950s. The 310 was also used by the Air Force, painted blue. It was called the Blue Canoe. And what's better than two 310s? Well, a 620. This was Cessna's first attempt at what today would be a commuter airplane, but it never went into production. But it was an interesting design. First flew in 1956. But Cessna wound up with the 150, an evolution of the tail-dragging 140, presenting a new $6,995 Cessna, all new, all metal, with Land-O-Matic and Paralift flaps. Really? Well, again, marketing to the public and to hopefully a new generation of pilots. But the 150 evolved to the 152, and this became the classic trainer that most pilots of our generation took their first lessons in. The four-seat version, the Cessna Skyhawk 172 model, originally straight tail, and now the swept wing with OmniVision that you swept tail. I'm sorry, that you see with OmniVision here, and this became the most produced airplane in history. We'll see the number in a moment. And now we have the Taylorcraft. Taylor was a businessman who started an airplane company in Bradford, Pennsylvania. And one of the investors in Taylorcraft was a oil tycoon named William T. Piper. Mr. Piper wound up buying the company in 1939, and his J3 Cub became a household name. And let's take a look at Piper through the years in a series of advertisements by the great Joe Catula. Joe was the same artist who did the Aurora box tops for many years. But here we see the Super Cruiser and the Tri-Pacer. The world is at your wingtips with a Piper. And moving into the 50s, there's a beautiful rendering of a Comanche taking off out of Meigs Field in Chicago. And here we have Ed Valigursky, who painted the Cherokee 180 at the family campsite here, showing again the sport and family aspect of general aviation. So you had Piper, Cessna, and Beechcraft as the top three. Here's a cockpit of the early 60s. This is a twin Comanche, but this was the technology of the time. You had your radio stack, the basic six, and all the controls. Compare that to an airplane today. It's like something out of science fiction by comparison. But that was the panel for the Cirrus RS-20 seen here. And well, we've come a long way since the J3. But you remember that million missions proving your post-war plane and the market that was estimated to be 200,000 airplanes? Let's take a look at what happened. Let's look at private plane production. The numbers are rounded, but you've got the Bell 47, Stinson, Piper Tri-Pacer, and all the models, the Mooney, the Beech Bonanza, the 150, the Cub, the Cherokee, and the 172. And if you add up these numbers, the total is 200,000 airplanes. So you can see that the marketing mavens had it correct. They were just 50 years too early. And there you have it, a look at post-war general aviation. Hope you've enjoyed this episode of Celebrating Aviation with Mike Machat. As always, special thanks to the organizations and entities that allowed us to make this presentation for you. Museum of Flying, the original Douglas Library, and Wings and Air Power magazine. So until next time, take care.